Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of the 120 podcast, the podcast where we talk about sepsis, disability, and chronic illness because all three intersect. Trust me, I am a septic shock survivor. I have multiple chronic conditions: hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Crohn's disease, POTS, severe osteoporosis. I've been disabled for many, many years because of those conditions. And 4 years ago, I almost died from an undiagnosed diverticulitis infection in my colon that led to a colon perforation that led me into septic shock very quickly. I had to be flown to one of the best trauma centers, luckily here in Central Maryland, over in Baltimore, called Shock Trauma, part of the University of Maryland medical system. I was very, very lucky. It seemed like that morning the right people were in the right place at the right time. I'm Jackie Duda, your host. I live here in Central Maryland, and I'm an advocate for sepsis and disability awareness, chronic illnesses, especially with institutions like or organizations like the Ehlers-Danlos Society. And today we're going to talk about, every once in a while, I get a little science geeky on my episode here. I think that even though I never majored in science in college, I was actually an English major, I was always fascinated by science, and I've always been a bit of a science nerd, so to speak. So, I love sitting and listening to, researchers and scientists talk about medical conditions, and maybe because I'm affected by so many, I don't know. But anyway, I want to get down to the science of sepsis, as well as the awareness and the advocacy. As those of you who have been watching my podcast know, that I've had other survivors on here. I have had family members who tragically lost someone to sepsis. I've had presidents of the national nonprofits like Sepsis Alliance, of which I'm an advisory board member, and End Sepsis. And now, I'm going to have another scientist on today, which I'm really, really excited. I was so lucky to meet the president of this company, actually a CEO, Dr. Richard Jones of Adrenomed in Germany. And they have developed a novel, and I'm going to give you a little scientific vocabulary word for the day. Novel in science terms means new. So they have developed a new treatment for septic shock. Yes, bringing someone back from the brink of sepsis. So it's hard to talk. We can't really talk about sepsis awareness and education and advocacy without discussing the science of it and what's out there in development as far as the diagnostics go or the treatments go. And again, I happened to come across this company where, I got to go and do some presentations and listen to some scientific evidence talking about the research behind this treatment that they have developed. And anyway, without further ado, because I can ramble on, as some of you know, so today I'm going to go halfway across the globe to speak with Dr. Richard Jones, CEO of Adrenomed in Germany, which is a privately financed biopharmaceutical company, sorry there guys, located in Germany. Adrenomed's mission is to save the lives of critically ill patients who have limited treatment options, with a focus on sepsis and septic shock. When Dr. Jones took the helm at Adrenomed in 2022, Dr. Jones had brought already with him 25 years of experience in senior leadership positions in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. His extensive portfolio includes work in the global antibodies marketplace throughout Europe. After gaining much of his scientific marketing expertise at large global pharma companies such as Novartis and GlaxoSmithKline, Dr. Jones has also worked with Genzyme Corporation and as an international franchise director for Shire Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Jones holds a BSc in Biochemistry and a PhD in Molecular Oncology from the University of Surrey. I am very excited to welcome Dr. Jones to my podcast today. And before we get to the interview, I just want to remind our viewers that the podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have an infection medical crisis, you suspect you have sepsis, or any medical issue for that matter, please contact your own physician or go to the nearest local emergency room. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jones to my podcast. Anyway, Dr. Jones, it's so great to have you here today. I've had the pleasure of interviewing you before, of course, for interviews for the Lancet stories that I've done. And it's great to have you on the podcast. It's always wonderful to talk about science and all the cool things that companies like Adrenomed are doing. And so I wanted to just start with asking if you could give our audience an overview of, Adrenomed, what it does, and so that the audience can understand your purpose and mission, and also like a snapshot of your background
Mhm.
in science and the why for doing the work that you do.
Many thanks for that, Jackie. Firstly, many thanks for having me on your podcast. Before we get into Adrenomed, I just want to say for myself, I'm very much inspired by the tireless works and efforts that you do personally, and drawing on your own personal experience to raise the awareness of medical issues and why we as a society need to do more. So you really are a true champion and advocate for patients as well. So I just wanted to say that as part of the part of this podcast.
Thank you.
Um, in terms of Adrenomed, yes. So Adrenomed, it's a small biotech company, so biotechnology, based in Germany, in Europe, that's focused on developing effective medicines and treatments for critical conditions, which include conditions such as sepsis and septic shock. So, what are critical conditions? So, these are conditions that it really is an urgency in terms of time. Normally, they require life-saving, urgent medical attention, include things such as trauma if you have a road traffic accident, heaven forbid, heart attacks, COVID. Obviously, we've gone through that episode in the last number of years, organ failures. And normally patients are admitted via the ED departments, so the emergency departments, and then hospitalized in the intensive care units. So as part of this is also sepsis and septic shock. So our mission as a company is to be able to develop effective treatments for tackling the high unmet medical need of what is sepsis and septic shock, which really is a worldwide problem. And despite that, there really are almost no advances in treatment options as well. So just very briefly, what is sepsis, in case people aren't aware what it is? It's a life-threatening condition. It can occur when the body goes into almost an overdrive response to a bacterial or viral infection. And this can be caused by something as a simple infection coming from a leg wound. If you scratch your leg, for example, climbing trees, if you're a younger person, obviously people of our age, it may be a little bit more challenging. Or if you have respiratory problems such as pneumonia, which happens quite often, or even COVID. And then patients can actually progress on to a more severe form of sepsis, which is septic shock. And then you get something called leaky vessels, which is essentially your blood vessels start to not function the way they should do. So obviously the blood is pumped around your body in these tubes, which are the blood vessels. And then you get a drop in blood pressure, and then that leads to your organs, your liver, your heart, your kidneys, your lungs not working as they should do, and that causes a sort of a catastrophic organ failure of the body and then eventual death as well. And despite the best in current treatments, the death rate is still almost unrealistically high, 45% in some countries, which is almost a 50-50 chance of surviving. So more people die from sepsis every single year than the top three cancer conditions combined, which is remarkable if you think about it. And what that means in the US, for example, 1,700,000 people every single year are diagnosed, and more than 350,000 people every single year will die as a result of sepsis or septic shock, with a very significant direct and indirect cost burden as well. So a shocking figure is that what that means is today, in the next 24 hours, more than 1,000 people in the US alone will die as a result of sepsis, and 200 people around the world in the next 10 minutes of our discussion. So these are quite sobering facts, and it can affect anybody. It doesn't matter your age, your medical status, your health status. It literally does not discriminate. So it can hit you if you're a young person, if you're a young, fit and healthy person. And there are some really strong examples of this. So, for example, some years ago, there was a poor 4-year-old boy called Daniel Clossie who was misdiagnosed and went to hospital. His parents took him to hospital 4 times and they just kept sending him back again. Unfortunately, he passed away. That was covered by Sky News. Also in the UK, quite a well-known member of Parliament, Craig McKinley, he survived it, and as you probably know, and he had to have all of his 4 limbs amputated, with the devastating after effect of what that means as well. Young fashion influencers, online who passed away because of a variant infection that went on to cause sepsis, and famous actors such as Till Schweiger. So for those of you who know who he is, he was in a film starring Brad Pitt as well. I won't mention the name. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks from an infected leg wound. Fortunately, went on to fully recover. And even the Pope recently, obviously the last pope I'm referring to. So he was hospitalized with double pneumonia, and he was actually also fighting against sepsis caused by the double pneumonia as well. So it really can hit anybody. It is just some examples. There are many more examples, and I think we'll probably touch on some later on. So our focus as Adrenomed, as a small biotech company, is really tackling this global healthcare crisis that we are currently facing at the moment, where there have been no changes in the last 3 decades in terms of effective treatments. And again, what happens is doctors in the intensive care units, they recognize the patients going into sepsis or into septic shock. They provide the best standard of care that they can do because this is all they have available to them. And the common statement by some of these intensivists or intensive care unit doctors is, I'm still using the same treatments approach that I learnt about at med school. I desperately need an effective treatment because I, as a doctor, want to save the life of that patient. And I know that I can only do so much, and the rest is almost down to whether the patient can make that recovery. But I desperately need a new treatment. And that's where companies like Adrenomed come into play. That's our mission, that's our goal, that's our objective.
Right, because treatment has been non-existent.
Exactly.
Once you
Exactly.
cross that slippery slope and
Yes.
descend
Yeah.
into septic shock, it's a one-way ticket down.
Yes.
I mean,
And it moves so quickly. This is the speed is the other concern here, because even talking to people in my network or in the industry, I remember meeting with a lady from another company based in China, funnily enough, and she mentioned that she had a friend of the family, again, young, fit and healthy individual, did lots of sports, 24 years of age. He had I think it was a leg infection, and then within 24 hours, he was hospitalized. 48 hours later, he died as a result of it. Another contact, in fact, an ex-colleague of mine from a pharma company, Shire Pharmaceuticals, she mentioned that her father, who she dearly loved, he had food poisoning, and then 48 hours later, he passed away as a result of sepsis. So yes, it could go very, very quickly, and there's a point in time, the tipping point, when the physician almost is limited in terms of how they can recover or re-rescue that patient. So the speed of diagnosis is critical, making sure that they get the best medical attention, and obviously making sure that they get the best treatments available to them as well.
and not all companies, I think people tend to think that biotech firms, pharmaceutical companies are rather large, but they're not all large. I mean, Adrenomed is kind of small, right?
Yes, exactly. So what you tend to find is some of these sort of development programs are really driven mainly by small biotech companies, and we have the flexibility. We're not a large organization, and so we can choose to focus on a particular condition. We have fantastic people, and the best minds in the area, and passionate about what we do as well. Because we're smaller, we're not hampered by the sort of the bureaucracy of larger companies, where it can take a while for them to make decisions that we could decide over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Adrenomed, we're a very small biotech company. We have just around 15 people working for us at the moment, and there are huge advantages of being a small biotech because you can focus on a specific condition. You can really sometimes get the best minds to help to be able to develop an effective treatment and also to do all of the development work that's actually needed. And because we're a small organization, we don't have the same challenges as some of these larger pharma companies where even making certain decisions can require various committees and discussions and it can take time as well. So the advantage of being a small biotech is you can be quick, you can be agile, you can be nimble, and more often than not, you have some of the best scientific minds and passionate people behind it as well. Preferably backed with investors. So obviously all of this requires funds. And we'll talk a little bit about later on in terms of some of the challenges, especially when it comes to developing treatments or medicines for sepsis and septic shock. But yes, once you have the funds, passionate investors who believe in the potential, and then you can really just move forward with this quite quickly as well, or as quickly as you possibly can. And that's the reason why I work in biotech. So I think one of the questions you asked was my background. So yeah, so I have a background in science. I studied at university, so I did a degree in biochemistry and went on to do a PhD in molecular oncology. And it's interesting because at that time I had the option for being a medical doctor, but I chose to be a PhD doctor. So sometimes you here when somebody says they're a doctor, you think, is it a medical doctor? Is it a different type of doctor? So yes, you have medical doctors who are qualified MDs,
Yes.
and then you have PhD doctors who essentially are people who've done research in a particular area. So I'm a PhD doctor. And the reason being was I felt, as we discussed earlier, if you're a doctor, you're limited in terms of what you have available to you. Whereas if you're doing the research, the science, you can then really look at what's causing the condition and be able to find ways where we can understand the condition better and then be able to develop treatments to be able to either cure or at least improve or even save the life of a patient suffering from that particular condition. So these are linked in together. So that was the reason why I decided to move into the biotech industry, and I've worked across various pharma companies, so including companies such as Shire Pharmaceuticals that people may know. Spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, so I got to know Philadelphia very well. And then Genzyme, that was based out of Boston. I had the privilege with working with a real leader and a pioneer in the area, especially in rare diseases, which is exactly the same thing. There are many rare diseases, but a lot of them aren't really that well understood. And even few of them actually have effective treatments. But when you talk to the patients and the families and understand what it's like living the way they have to live on a day-to-day basis, it really can be quite heartbreaking. So I had the chance to really understand that with working within Genzyme, and then worked in some of the larger companies such as GSK and Novartis, also spending a lot of time in Philadelphia. So that seemed to be my second home. Again, working in rare or blood cancer type of conditions as well. So again, hard to treat. Also worked with a company called Axia Ionis, which is again based in Boston and Carlsbad, more on a different type of novel technology, mRNA, which some people may have heard about from BioNTech, which is obviously part of the COVID vaccine programs as well. And then CEO for various biotech companies, but really all very much focused on high unmet medical needs. So the reason why I do what I do, I'm very passionate about making a difference to the lives of patients and their families, especially those suffering from serious medical conditions. Because if you walk in the shoes of somebody suffering from, pick whatever the condition might be, or if they survived the condition and were afflicted as a result of surviving that condition as well, what we can take for granted for them actually can become a real struggle as well. So anything we can do to try and improve that, I'm very much focused or always wanting to understand the patient story. What is it like living with it? Because that is such a powerfully driving force. And that's something I learned when I was in Genzyme. The CEO there, Henry Tamir, always made the point every single Friday lunchtime we'll invite a patient with their families to come in and just talk about their journey, their experiences, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, what it's like living with the condition in all of the areas that we were working on developing treatments. And for me, that was my North Star, as it were, is really the anchor point. And again, in the area of sepsis, the fact that, as we discussed earlier, in this day and age, after 3 decades of no new treatments, it's still amazing the fact that there are no new treatment options. So here, having the opportunity working within the Adrenomed to be able to develop and make available the new treatment options that can save the lives of thousands and possibly millions of patients all around the world. And if you think what that means, not just to the patient, but also to their loved ones and their family. So this can mean that the mum or dad who could have passed away can be around to see their son or their daughter go to college or get married or achieve their life goals. You could imagine that the husband or wife or the life partner can be saved, so they could also be around for longer and enjoy that relationship. And it's not just about saving the life; it's also about improving the quality of the life saved as well. You want to do the best that you can, that the person is able to go on and lead a normal life as much as possible. So yeah, that's the reason why I do what I do, and that's the reason why I'm very passionate about what I do.
Well, Dr. Jones, that's really powerful stuff, what you just said. And, a few key things that I took from, just in describing number one, your background. You seem to have dived into some of the most difficult areas to treat with,
Hmm.
oncology, cancer research, molecular oncology, and then rare diseases, which I have one. And I totally get that. It
Hmm.
just impacts us so much. And, sometimes we go to our doctors who treat us, and you feel like, why am I doing this? Because there's
Yes.
no treatment and there's no cure. And just that your background has taken you through that. And then here you are doing research into treating septic shock, which when I go out into my community and I tell my story and I talk about, sepsis, the number two things, there's two things people want to know. Is anyone diagnosing it or developing diagnostics to diagnose it accurately and
Hmm.
quickly? And is there any treatment? And there's just up until Adrenomeds started to pursue this novel treatment, novel for my audience, meaning new. It's,
Hmm.
first time attempting something like this. And it's astounding. You're speaking to someone here. I talk to survivors, which those are pleasant conversations here for the most part on the podcast. And then I speak with family members who've lost somebody,
Yes.
and that's devastating. That just, it rips my heart out. And what you just said there at the end, talking about if that person can be there to see their child graduate, to still be here, and we stop having all of these unnecessary deaths. That Dr. Jones, worldwide, I know here in the US it's 350,000 adults, 6,800 children a year die from sepsis. Worldwide, isn't that number is tremendous, isn't it?
So worldwide, it's 11 million, because the majority of deaths, unfortunately, are not also in the low middle income countries. So when you go to areas like Sub-Saharan Sudan, India, areas of Latin America, where even the doctors are unfortunately don't have the adequate training on diagnosing a patient coming in and suffering from early signs of sepsis, because there the number of patients getting sepsis is actually much higher because of the conditions that they live in as well. And in some of these areas, they just don't have the infrastructure. They just don't have the system in terms of getting access to medical care as well, or urgent medical care. So yeah, so the numbers in globally or worldwide are even higher. 85% of all global sepsis cases are in the low middle income countries, 85%. And pediatric, which are the young children, and neonatal, 5%, these are newborn children under the age of 2, under the age of 5, um, pregnant ladies as well. Maternity, the numbers are absolutely staggering, and it requires not only developing treatments, but also and making them available, but it's also the medical education, both to the doctors or the medical physicians, the treating physicians, to the community, so they recognize the signs, the early signs of sepsis, and make sure the patient, they can take the patient to a doctor who's adequately trained. The diagnostics, exactly as you mentioned, and also the care as well, which hospitals has the adequate systems, processes, equipment, all of the infrastructure. And all of that requires policy changes, reforms. It requires governmental initiatives as well. So all of these things combined together is the way that we can tackle in those particular geographies as well. I think in the US and in Europe, we can discuss this later on, but I think it is there. The question now is more around driving education, understanding, and also making sure that the diagnostics, how can you do the right diagnostic tests and checks, and making sure there's an effective treatment as well for those patients.
Right, because to give someone the gift of their family member remaining with
Yes,
them is the
yes,
ultimate goal here. And
exactly. Yeah. And if you think of all the lives that could be saved, even if it's just a percentage of all those lives that can be saved, obviously the aspiration and the ambition would be to save everybody. But even if it's a percentage of those lives saved, then those individuals can not only be around with their family, loved ones, etc., but also they can continue to contribute to society. And you never know, it could be the person that develops the new big idea for solving a particular problem, or can develop a business that can create job opportunities. They could go on to be a fantastic artist. I mean, there are so many possibilities, and having these lives cut short unnecessarily and needlessly in this modern day and age, when we as society should be focusing on doing something about tackling this significant unmet medical need, which does go across a number of different components or different parts as well. It's not one singular thing, but I think collectively this is something that we really need to focus on.
yes, absolutely, because it has such a tremendous impact and, awareness, education, all of those things that you just
Yes,
talked about are
yes.
so important. And so now along comes Adrenomed. And I
Hmm.
remember it was, I think it's been more than a year now because I spoke at
Yes,
the
yes.
French embassy this year and also last year. And I could, true confession here, I was terrified the first time I went to speak, because I remember it was like I was in biology 101 again. And I broke out all of the materials that Eva had sent me. And I'm trying to read these going, wow, it's been a while. And trying to really fully understand. And it took me a bit. So I was hoping that you could explain to our audience
Yes,
I'm
yes,
talking about the antibody. And did I
yes,
have the pronunciation right? Enabarsimab?
that's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I'll describe what it is. So in even for ourselves as well, to be
Yes.
honest, sometimes it's easier to describe it in an easy way. So yeah, so we have a medicine. It's in what we call the final stage of clinical development. So obviously you need to generate clinical data and evidence to show that the drug is safe and effective as well. And obviously that goes through a formal regulatory process. The drug is enibarsimab. It's a monoclonal antibody. Now, what is an antibody? This is interesting. So essentially, an antibody is a protein that's made by your body naturally, which is produced to actually fight against an infection. So again, one of the reasons why I enjoy the science is I always find it amazing how amazing your body is, as almost essentially as a miracle of nature. So your body can actually produce these types of antibodies naturally as a way of responding to an infection. So it's an immune reaction to it. So what a monoclonal antibody is when we in the scientific community can actually generate an antibody that could be produced in your body, but we produce it outside of the body. So we produce it in the laboratory. We clone a white blood cell. So red blood cells is what happens when you cut your skin and you get red coming out of it, obviously. But white blood cells are also in your body, and these are your immune cells. So we can take a white blood cell, program it to produce an antibody, which we can then make sure is there's ways of designing the actual antibody, and this is what becomes the monoclonal antibody, and it targets a specific molecule or cell. So that's essentially what an antibody is, what a monoclonal antibody. And enibosumab is a monoclonal antibody designed specifically to target a natural hormone that your body produces called adrenomedulin. So what is adrenomedulin? It's a hormone that essentially keeps your blood vessels stable in simple terms. So if you think of your blood vessels as being the tube, obviously you have blood going through it. It needs to be at a specific type of rigidity. Another way you're thinking about it is your garden hose when you're watering your garden or your flowers or your grass. You have a pressure going through it, and obviously you've got the water coming out. If for some reason you start getting holes appearing in the hose, then obviously you're leaking, and then your blood pressure, the pressure goes down, and you get less coming out at the end of it. So, in a simple way, that's sort of what happens when your body goes into this overdrive response and leading to sepsis. So, the way our antibody works is it binds to this hormone called adrenomedulin, which normally will be broken down quite quickly by the body. It binds to it, and then it keeps it active. It extends its ability to stay within the blood. And then through that, it then creates this long and lasting protection and restabilization, almost refixing the holes, if you will, of the hose, precisely when the patient in sepsis or septic shock actually needs it the most. So, because normally an infection leading to sepsis, you get inflammation, you get these leaky blood vessels, a bit like the hose analogy. You get a drop in blood pressure, which means your organs don't get the blood that they need, your heart, liver, lung, brain, etc. And then you get organ failure as a result of it, and then you get eventual death. So the goal of treatment and what we do differently is to really to stabilize and protect the blood vessels and almost reverse all of that cascade that I've been referring to. And as soon as the patient is diagnosed in the ICU, in the intensive care unit, they should be given the drug enibosumab as a single IV infusion. So if you're in the ICU unit, heaven forbid, is actually just added to the saline drip that you are having, and it's a 1 hour infusion, and that is it. And as part of our breakthrough solution is also we do have a diagnostic component as well. So we developed this system where we measure two blood markers. It's a simple blood test. You can get results within 25 minutes using a specific device. And what they enable us to do is to identify the patients who are more likely to respond to the treatments as well. And the data that we've generated so far would suggest it's about 50% of all septic shock patients as well. So again, this is what we were discussing earlier. It's one thing having the drug or the medicine available, but it's also important to have the diagnostics, so that way we can identify the patients that are more likely to respond. And I think a well-worn phrase is always make sure you identify the right patient, give them the right medicine at the right dose and at the right time as well. And yes, so the plan is really to do one more study, generate some further clinical evidence for enibosumab, in septic shock, and then pursue getting marketing authorization, which is basically approval by the regulatory authorities, the US FDA and the European Medicines Agency. And then once we have an approval for the use of the medicine in that particular indication or setting, septic shock, then we would initiate further development, clinical development programs in sepsis, which is sort of the earlier sepsis before it goes to septic shock, and even prevention of septic shock as well. So if you give the medicine early enough, you may actually prevent somebody going into the more serious form of sepsis as well.
As someone who was in septic shock, yeah, I wholeheartedly
Yes,
would prefer
yes,
that to not go
yes,
into septic shock
exactly, exactly.
because,
Yeah,
yeah. And so essentially, so you developed an antibody that, and I love that analogy to think of it like the leaky garden hose that our blood vessels
yes,
should be all cohesive and together so that the blood circulates throughout the body and gets it to the organs where it needs to be to keep everything
yes,
functioning. But if it's like that garden hose, and I have one right out there right now, has several leaks, and every time I turn it
exactly.
on,
Yeah,
you can see it spraying everywhere and the pressure goes down. I mean, you just don't have the pressure. So that antibody, enobarbacimab, can help restore that
exactly.
integrity to the
Yes,
blood vessel, to the garden hose.
exactly, exactly.
That's
And
amazing.
we have data. So we have a very comprehensive clinical data package. So that basically means you have patients in the hospital. There is a what we call an informed consent. So if the treating doctor says, actually, I can give you what we currently have, which is the standard of care, which is infusion of, antibiotics, fluids, vasopressors, and worst case ventilation as well. But they can also ask of not the patient, because obviously the patient's not in a position to respond to this, but they could ask the patient's family. There is a clinical study, there is an experimental medicine. Um, Based on what we've seen of data, this could actually help to save the life of that particular patient. Would you give us consent to include the patient into this particular clinical study? So we've conducted various studies. We did a recent one, or the last one we did was a large study with over 300 patients as part of this
Large.
study, which is quite large. So 24 sites over 4 countries. And the data, the results was absolutely stunning from my perspective or our perspective. So what it translates into is there was a 67% reduction of death rates. So in other words, the patients that were treated not only with the standard of care, but also were given, in addition, enobarbacimab, the medicine, 67% of them responded compared to the ones on the placebo. So in other words, there was a 67% reduction in death rates, which is absolutely remarkable.
That
And it's
is.
truly stunning data, yeah. And in particular in this area where it literally is about life or death. That's the sort of the outcome, if you will. And also using the biomarker approach. So at a high level in septic shock, using enobarbacimab, using the two biomarkers, you go from a 1 in 4 chance of dying to only a 1 in 12 chance of dying, which is a big difference, to be honest. So the plan here is really to be able to do the next study to replicate or reproduce or even better that data. And then with that, we can then go to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, and the same in Europe and beyond Europe as well, and the US, to other countries around the world, to be able to pursue getting an approval for having the medicine registered and then make it available to those patients that need it within the hospital as well.
That's incredible. Now, how does this antibody differ from the antibiotics that were given as the standard of care to treat
Yes.
sepsis.
Yeah, so the way the antibiotics work is they tackle the infection. So they are then used to be able to, and normally it's bacterial infections. Um, what happens then is you're treating almost the symptom in a way, because what happens with when you enter into sepsis or severe sepsis or septic shock, there's almost a cascade, and there's a point in time when the body's got into an overdrive response, and that's what creates this almost like a storm. So it then becomes less about the actual infection because you've gone past that point. Then you get the analogy, the blood vessels start to become leaky, then you start losing pressure. And that's the reason why they then give them patients are given vasopressors and then go on to ventilation. And then, then it's at that point whether or not the patient's actually going to survive. So the start point obviously is tackling the actual infection itself. But there is a point when it's gone beyond that being an effective sort of treatment strategy, and then it's really about trying to ensure that the patient doesn't go into that almost an avalanche cascade, quickly progressing from infection to inflammation, and then you start getting organ dysfunction and failure, and then eventual death as well. So the way our drug or the medicine works is it targets it's called the underlying causality. So what's causing sepsis? One is obviously the infection, but the second part is the cascade, which is driven predominantly by the loss of the blood vessel integrity and tone. So that's the difference between the two.
That's so remarkable too, because sepsis is still pretty much, it's such an enigma in even trying to define it in a clinical terms, and what it is
Yes.
and why it does what it does in, certain people. So that's truly remarkable. And so this becomes, as you said, there's the biomarkers first that you check for in a patient.
Yes.
You check for those two biomarkers, and then if the patient, if it's shown that the patient may benefit from the treatment, and then they're given the 1 hour IV infusion of
Mhm.
the enobosarm.
Exactly. And the way we see this is this should be part of the normal standard of care within any hospital. So they have a protocol, which is almost the guidelines for how they treat any condition within the hospital, in particular in the ICU unit. So there it should be, if a patient is diagnosed with sepsis or going into septic shock, then there are specific things that they need to do. They will take blood samples anyway. They will take blood from the patient, and then they will send it to the facilities they have within the hospitals, where they have machines to do all of the blood analysis, from red blood cell counts to other markers that they would look for. And the vision would be that they would also include these two biomarkers as well. So when the physician gets the results back, they will be able to identify, the different blood levels for the particular patient, and then they would see the tick for yes, the patient has the right parameters for those two biomarkers, and therefore they should be given the drug enibosarm as well.
So that's wonderful, because the way I'm hearing it is this should be accessible for all hospitals, something that every hospital could offer, because they're already doing blood work on the patient, and they could check also, add on to check for the biomarkers. And all hospitals, of course, have that capability of hanging that IV bag to deliver medicine. And there's no like special equipment required. There's nothing unusual that's required to either test for the biomarkers or to deliver the medicine. It sounds like it's just highly accessible.
Yes, that would be the plan. So we also have a device. It's what they call a point of care device. What is that? It's a small reader that you can actually have sitting in the ICU unit, literally by the bedside of that particular patient. So what that means, if there are certain hospitals that may not have the big machines or testing systems in the hospitals. I'm thinking more of the rural type hospitals, for
Yes.
example. Or the doctor, the physician may have a preference. They may say, actually, I prefer to have a smaller test system, a reader, literally next to the bedside here. And all they need to do is take the blood sample, dot it onto the equivalent of a CD, which is, it literally looks like a CD. You put it into the reader, and then you get the results within 20 to 25 minutes as well. So again, the overall goal here is to make the medicine available to as many patients as possible and become part of routine treatment in as many hospitals as possible as well. And it just gives flexibility for those hospitals that may have a preference for a smaller device versus those hospitals that may prefer to integrate into their existing systems. And it could be depending on whether they have those systems or not, or it could be a preference for whether the physician would prefer to have that particular device in the hospital bedside table there as well.
So it's remarkably showing well in clinical trials, and it's practical as well. I mean, I love this.
Exactly.
It's wonderful. Now, in terms of the
Exactly.
clinical trials themselves, so it's already been through, was it two clinical trials, and it needs to go through a third?
So we need to do one more clinical study,
Yes.
and we have had some interactions with the European Medicines Agency, and we are currently putting forward, just based on their initial advice, which was to run one more study. So basically, conduct one more large study, maybe up between 300 or even 500 patients, global as well, so it'd be US and in Europe. And obviously, we firmly believe that we can reproduce that data that I mentioned earlier based on our previous study showing the 67% reduction in death rates with the biomarkers as well. Then we can take the result and then go to the regulatory agencies and then look to be able to get full marketing authorization, which is basically getting the product approved. And then the product will then be made available both in the US and Europe. And then we also look to make it available in other countries as well.
Wow. Dr. Jones, how soon can this happen?
Yeah, great question. So we have the plan, we have the people. I think what we're currently looking to do, and this is part of the challenges, is being able to secure the funding. So which is not easy. And we talked about this at the beginning in terms of, how can we best tackle the unmet medical need of sepsis and septic shock. And I would say from a biotech company's perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges, really obstacles, is securing the funds to be able to run that study as well. So, and despite the fact that there is a growing or increasing awareness and recognition of the burden of sepsis and septic shock, securing funds continues to prove to be quite challenging. I think there has been a roller coaster. I think many small biotech companies, startup ones in particular, have experienced quite a lot of challenges after the COVID era because that I think that had a huge effect, not just on the biotech or pharma or life science industry, but I think across every industry all around the world. So obviously that was part of it. But I think after that, we noted that many investors, so these are sort of venture capitalist or VC firms who typically would put money or fund a company to be able to do development work. There's been the view that they became overly cautious because obviously they see sepsis as being quite a difficult and challenging area, and sometimes it's viewed almost as a graveyard of drug discovery. But again, going back to the reason why I do what I do, that should not be the reason why we should not invest into developing treatments. If you look at pediatric leukemia, 50 years ago, it was almost seen to be a death sentence, and people saw it as very challenging. That's changed. Now it's a 90% cure rate. If you look at different types of hard to treat cancer conditions, Alzheimer's, stroke, you name it, there are many conditions that people say that it's the graveyard or very challenging, but the whole point is we always got to keep trying and striving to be able to break the code or crack the code, as I like to refer to it, to make a condition from being seen to be an untreatable to a treatable condition as well. So, and in particular on the strength of the data that we have as well, I think people should really look at that and think, okay, yes, how can we help the company to be able to deliver on the ambition, but more importantly, to have the funds, run this one study, get the product approved or the medicine approved and make it available to patients. So as a small European, and this is a bit of our mantra, as a small European biotech company, we are tackling a global healthcare crisis. And I think the first key challenge, obviously, finding funding to running our next study. The team is in place, the plan is in place, and with the continued support of the broader sepsis community and hopefully having access to the necessary funds, we'll be able to move that forward as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because, you know, with a 67%, it was 67% of the people.
Reduction in mortality, yeah, in patients that were
And that's
treated with,
mind-blowing.
yes, yes. No, I agree. It's absolutely stunning data we see, yeah.
So, and you're right. I mean, we used to have all these conditions. I'm 63 and I feel like I balance between two different worlds when it comes to disease treatment and medicine and research, because when I was younger, much younger, I saw people, diagnosed with childhood leukemia that did not
Yes,
live longer than a few years. And breast cancer was a death sentence, no matter what. And I had an aunt who was had stomach problems and went into surgery, and they did an exploratory. What they did a lot back then was exploratory because they didn't have MRI or CAT scans, and found she was full of cancer. And that was it. And she was gone within a few months. I mean, and now these are things where we see cancer survivors walking around everywhere, breast cancer survivors, pancreatic cancer, they're having more, effective treatments where there's just all these things, and leukemia. I mean, they can, depending on the type of childhood leukemia, they can cure it, so to speak. So we absolutely have to push these novel therapies forward in treatment of something as devastating and widespread that affects so many people in the US, in the UK, and globally. Now's the time. If not now, then when is the
exactly.
question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a great example of this, and this is almost in line with what you just mentioned. We should do everything we can as a society to tackle these types of conditions. We should be bold as a society. We have been bold. We can be bolder, and say we shouldn't just assume, okay, we can't do anything about it. Let's focus on something else. In particular, with these huge impact global conditions and medical conditions like sepsis and septic shock. So everything we can do to increase awareness, changing public policies, the reforms, the work that you do, for example, continue to drive the development of effective diagnostics, tools and medicines so that the treating physicians have those tools in their toolbox to be able to, hopefully save the life of a patient, and make them available. It's all accessibility is obviously another discussion to make sure that patients who need them generally can get access to them and they're not restricted of getting access to them. Time is key. Early identification is key. Diagnosis is key. Information is key, and all of these things, as you know, can determine whether a patient will live or will not. And if they do survive, again, it's about the quality of their life. So I think, again, in this day and age, the unnecessary loss of a life that we as a society can actually save, it really isn't acceptable, and we can do more and we should do more. I mean, one really emotive example, and I know we've seen this on the social media, which is the poignant story of Rory Staunton. I mean, it's a 12-year-old boy full of life, full of hopes, ambitions, aspirations, as you would have with a 12-year-old boy living in the US who tragically passed away over 13 years ago because of undiagnosis, misdiagnosis, untreated. and that could have been prevented. I mean, he died needlessly after, as I mentioned earlier, scraping his arm, as simple as something as simple as that during sports at the school. The people there didn't really know what to do with it. Various misdiagnoses. The treating physician didn't really know what to do with it, and lack of urgent, proper medical attention, resulting in him progressing quickly to septic shock and then obviously tragically passing away. And his death, like many others, could have been prevented through correct education, awareness, how to spot, treat sepsis, ensuring that the correct procedures are in place at the hospital and the best treatments are available there at the hospital as well. Um, and it's good to see. I mean, a key part of this really is around driving policy changes, and the Sepsis Act, which is being championed by Senator Chuck Schumer, taking this to the Senate floor. I know there's been some backwards and forwarding on that, but I think this legislation would further enable establishing programs, hopefully freeing up funds or governmental funds to be able to, again, help us to address sepsis and septic shock. And it's a key part of the puzzle. There's more that we need to do. And I think part of this is also continuing to champion the need for driving change and turning talking into actual action so we can prevent these needless deaths like Rory Staunton, like Daniel Closey, the 4-year-old boy I mentioned earlier, and so many others. I mean, there are so many, 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 many others, and unfortunately many others yet to come as well. So anything we can do to try and prevent all of that. We have the tools available to us. It's just a question of making them be progressed into something that can then change how we approach these types of conditions, and how we can save patients' lives as well.
And I mean, how people think also about prioritizing, like how
Yes.
investors think about prioritizing their funding and whom they want to fund and why. And this is as worthy a cause as any, because as you just described, those two young boys did not need to die. And with pediatric cases especially, I think they fly under the radar of the physicians at first because
Mhm.
it's a young child, and you can't possibly imagine that they could be so sick or get so sick so quickly and devolve into what all of septic shock brings. And imagine if there were a treatment, like in a barsamab, that could be delivered to this young boy, and the process of the death spiral that is septic shock
Mhm.
could be stopped in its tracks.
I agree, and part of this is also the problem. We know the problem, but if there isn't an effective solution, that drives a certain type of behavior. So again, the analogy is, I don't know, in your home life, if you see there's I don't know, some weeds have taken over your garden, and you think, oh, again, I can't really do anything about it. I can see the weeds, but if I have to keep going there and pulling it up, and you just think, I'm not going to do anything with it. It's a very crude analogy, but it's similar, because if you have a quick, simple, straightforward solution, you're more likely to do something about the problem. And having treatments, diagnostics available means that, and it's not just in sepsis and septic shock, but as we discussed earlier, other conditions where there were no treatment. So it drives a certain type of behavior, which is, well, I can't really do that much more about it because I don't have anything that I can use to adequately treat this as well. So I think having diagnostics, medicines available will hopefully help to drive not only that there is something as a solution, but also the earlier diagnosis, speed for decision making, making sure that patients get to the right clinic. We don't have these misdiagnosed cases that leads to these, unfortunately, the cases like Rory and Daniel and many others as well. So I think all of these go hand in hand together.
So in summation, it sounds like what's next for Adrenomed and abarsamab is to get to that next phase, that final trial, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yes. So we run the one next study. And once we have the results and the data on our hands, then we can engage with the FDA and also with the EMA, the European Medicine Agency, to be able to get the drug approved and then make it available in the US and in Europe and to as many patients around the world. And then hopefully, 10 years from now, you and I can have a further discussion and say these are the number of lives that have been saved, and maybe even have some of those patients talking about their experience and what that meant to them surviving this. So it all starts here, and it'd be great if we can play a role in making that happen in the future as well and beyond.
I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it already, Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
It's got to happen. And yes, I mean, full steam ahead, and all my best wishes that you Adrenomed can get there and get this to the FDA and the likewise FDA type regulation agency in the UK, and get this to as many patients as possible. I mean, realistically, if investing and funding came through, how soon could it occur?
So I think realistically, we're looking at the next within 3 years.
That's
Uh, this
remarkable.
could be this could be available. Yeah,
Right.
I think, and again, that's the thing, isn't it? One of my learns at working in the various companies, it's not just about, obviously a key component is developing the medicine, but it's also how quickly you can make it available to patients, because every day that passes, there could be a patient that could have benefited from that treatment as well. So once we are able to secure the funds that's needed to be able to run the next study, we will then ensure that we are able to run it as quickly as possible and look to be able to get the approval from the FDA and the European Medicine Agency as soon as possible, because patients need it, doctors are desperately waiting for it, and as a society, we owe it to ourselves, to society, to each other, and to humanity to make these types of treatments available as soon as possible.
Here, here, 100%. Dr. Jones, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, that Adrenomed is doing. And, on behalf of, being a septic shock survivor myself, and, I want to thank you. And I'm sure many, many families are going to come to thank you as well in the future. Once, you can get it through these next steps and get it out there and make it available to patients. Are there any other like parting things for our audience? Anything you'd like them to remember, take forward with them?
I think it's what I mentioned, which is anything that we can do collectively to be able to make these types of conditions become almost a thing of the past. And we should avoid all of these needless deaths like those two boys that I mentioned, but there's so many others as well. So I think everything we can do collectively to raise awareness and help championing the cause for we need to act, we need to do something about this. And the Sepsis Act is one component. I think the work that you do is another essential part of it as well. The role of biotech companies like Adrenomed is obviously a part of this. Diagnostic companies as well, the Sepsis Alliance groups, both the global ones and the various regional ones, um, groups like the WHO, the CDC. I mean, there are so many stakeholders and bodies that are involved or could be involved. But I think together, what we need to do is figure a way that we can eradicate this devastating condition, to make it to the point when, if somebody is experiencing early forms of sepsis and have the signs of it, they are less likely to go on to die as a result of it as well, because the interventions are there, the education is there, the treatment options are there, the right centres are there, and they have access to the necessary medical treatments as well. that can be provided to them. So I think that the party words really is just let's champion everything that we possibly can to be able to make this happen, and to support the efforts that you're doing, Jackie, as well, and to support the efforts of other groups like Senator Chuck Schumer, and there's so many others around the world as well.
Yes, I think sepsis is a heavy lift, and the parting words that you're leaving us with send a loud and clear message that it requires us to all lift together.
Yes, yes, it does.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Thank you to my audience for tuning in again today. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and there will be some links to Adrenomed and their work in the description box. And I thank you all. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for being here with me today.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Great to speak with you.